Good morning. We want to pick right up where we left off last time and continue our discussion of validity and truth and falsity and soundness to try to make this central concept clear to you. So remember last time we said that arguments are valid or invalid because of their logical form. Right? Arguments are instances, or substitution instances. That's instances is shorthand for substitution instances for their logical form. So any individual argument instance is valid if and only if its argument form is valid. And an argument form is said to be valid if and only if it's impossible to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So a valid argument is then an argument that's an instance of a valid argument form, which means that if an argument is an instance of a valid argument form and it has all true premises, then it has to have a true conclusion as well. So if all the premises are true, then the conclusion just has to be true. So let's think about some consequences of this. A valid argument can have one or more false premises. Right? Consider this one. Every cat is a mammal. Every mammal has a beak, so every cat has a beak. Now this is a valid argument, right? Which means if the premises are true, then the conclusion has to be true. Now it's true that every cat is a mammal, but it's false that every mammal has a beak, and it's false that every cat has a beak. But nonetheless, it's true that every cat is a mammal, and if it were true that every mammal has a beak in some possible world, then it would, have to be true that every cat has a beak. Now second, just because all the premises are true, it doesn't mean that the argument is valid, right? Some people will think just because they sling together a bunch of true statements and then make another statement that conclusion is true just because they've said these other true statements. You see politicians doing this all the time. But the conclusion has to be connected in the proper way with the premises. That's what would make it valid. So consider this one. Some philosopher is rich. I happen to know one. Jim is a philosopher. That's true. That's me. But it's definitely false that Jim is rich. This is a sad but true fact. I got so sad I screwed up talking about it. Again, remember the key point. An argument is sound if and only if we know that all the premises are in fact true and that its form is valid. Now, even if you have all true premises and a true conclusion, it doesn't mean the argument is valid. Just because somebody slings together a bunch of true statements and happens to call one of them a conclusion doesn't make it the conclusion of a valid argument. I could argue that every cat is a mammal, and that's true. And I could argue that every human is an animal, and that's true. And I could argue then, and I could then say, well, so every mammal is warm-blooded. Now, it's true that every mammal is warm-blooded, but the fact that every cat is a mammal and every human is an animal has nothing to do with that conclusion, right? So that does not make this a valid argument. It's invalid. Now, fourth, you could have all false premises and a false conclusion, and the argument could still be valid. Because again, validity is about the form of a thing and not the content. The form and not the content. Consider, every cat is a reptile. Every reptile is a winged beast. So every cat is a winged beast. Well, it's certainly false that every cat is a reptile. It's certainly false that every reptile is a winged beast. And it's certainly false that every cat is a winged beast. Thank goodness, right? Wouldn't it be awful if cats could fly around? Those wretched beasts. Think what they could do with their claws if they could fly around, right? But if every cat was a reptile, and if every reptile was a winged beast in some possible world, then it would have to be true that every cat was a winged beast as well. So the only impossible combination of truth and falsity in a valid argument is to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So if an argument is valid with all true premises, right, its conclusion must be true. And if an argument is valid and its conclusion is false, at least one of its premises would have to be false. Now why? Because if it had all true premises and a false conclusion, it would be invalid. So consider these following true or false problems with me, which, I don't know, you might see some variant of them again on some exam. There are these things called exams, I've heard, and I might give you one or two, and on them I might ask you to answer some true or false questions and try to explain your answer. And here is how you would do it. Suppose you had to decide whether or not this is true or false. If an argument is valid, then all its premises are true. Well, that's false, because a valid argument can have one or more false premises. The thing to keep in mind is the only impossible combination in a valid argument would be to have all true premises and a false conclusion. Consider number 2. A sound argument can have a false conclusion. That's false. Why? By definition, a sound argument is a valid argument with all true premises, and it's impossible for a valid argument to have all true premises and a false conclusion. So if the argument is sound, it must have a true conclusion. Consider, every sound argument is also a valid argument. Okay? Every sound argument is a valid argument, but not every valid argument is a sound argument. Look at number 3. A valid argument can have one or more false premises. That's true. A valid argument can have one or more false premises. Again, the only impossible combination in a valid argument would be to have all true premises and a false conclusion. Now consider this one. If all the premises are true, the argument must be valid. Now that's false. You could have all true premises and a false conclusion, which would mean that the argument was invalid. Now, notice how this is phrased. This is what I call LSAT phrasing, law school admissions test phrasing. In tests like that, they want to see if you're paying attention to exactly what is being said, and you're only basing your judgments on exactly the information you've been given and nothing more, right? And all you know in number 4 is that all the premises are true, right? But just because all the premises are true, we don't know what, and we don't know what the conclusion is, right? What if the conclusion was false, right? So you could have all true premises and a false conclusion. So just knowing that all the premises are true doesn't tell you whether it's valid or not. And 5, an invalid argument can have all true premises and a true conclusion. That's true, right? Just slinging together a bunch of true statements doesn't make it an argument. I could say all cats are mammals, all dogs are mammals, so all ferrets are mammals. But the premises don't support that conclusion. From the simple fact that an argument is invalid, you can draw no conclusion whatsoever about the truth or falsity of the premises or the conclusions. That's why they're bad arguments. Now here it says, if an argument is sound, then it must be valid as well. And this is true, right? By definition, a sound argument is a valid argument with all true premises, so it has to be valid. Or you could say, well, all sound arguments are valid arguments, so duh, right? A sound argument has to be valid. Number 7, a valid argument with a false conclusion must have at least one false premise. And that's true, because if it had all true premises, then it would have to be invalid, because what it means to be invalid is to have all true premises and a false conclusion. Now here, you're asked to say, or you're asked to evaluate the statement, an argument with a false conclusion must be invalid. Now, here again we have LSAT phrasing, law school admissions test phrasing, or phrasing wherever people want you to think accurately and clearly and show your brain, right? You're asked to judge only on the basis of the information you've been given. And all you know is you've got an argument with a false conclusion. Now, it would be invalid only if you had all true premises. But if all we know is that we have a false conclusion, there's no way to judge whether it's valid or invalid. From the simple fact that an argument is invalid, you can draw no conclusion whatsoever about the truth or falsity of the premises or the conclusion. 9 states, in a valid argument, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well. And that's true because, duh, you could say, duh, that's the definition of a valid argument. And here we see, here we have the statement, the conclusion of a sound argument must be true. And that's true. Why? Well, because a sound argument is a valid argument with all true premises. And if a valid argument has all true premises, then its conclusion must be true as well. So, or one way just to keep that in mind is, in a sound argument, every premise is true and the conclusion is true. And because the form is valid, you've got the best possible kind of argument you can have, one that's both valid and sound. So think about these things, meditate upon them, grow mindful of them, drink coffee and whisper them to your friends. Over the internet or phone, I guess. It's when it's supposed to be congregating together. Or tell them to each other from 6 feet away. But in any case, study, think. We've only got 18 days to cover this material. So you've got to just work like a crazy person for the 18 days. But fortunately, it's only one class. You know that during a regular semester, all professors act as if you're only taking their class and you're not taking 3 other ones. But in this case, it's true. You're not taking any other classes. So work hard on my stuff. And I'll have another video coming right at you real quick.